Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Scientific Approach. Today, I have a very special video. It's the first debate that I'm having with a brother of a friend. His name is Joel. Joel, would you say you support the MAGA movement slash Trump administration?
I would say not all of it. There's some good stuff that I think the administration has done, and obviously more recently, especially around immigration, there's a lot of stuff that I completely disagree with. So
Okay.
I would say it's a mixed bag.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to be clear as well that I'm not going to be I'm going to try as possible as much as possible not to refer to Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, any of those terms because those just create bias. I think we should follow people and policy, and obviously respect the Constitution and all that. But just to avoid bias as much as possible, I'm not going to be referencing those terms specifically, which is why I wanted to specifically ask him if he follows MAGA slash Donald Trump. Today, we're going to be talking about a few different things. We're going to be talking about free speech. And we're obviously going to be comparing like Biden and Trump when it comes to free speech. We're going to be comparing them with the Afghanistan pullout, with immigration, and we're also going to talk about guns. I think we said the next thing we're going to talk about is free speech. Um, and this was one of the top topics that you wanted to present, Joel. Um, and if you want to start with the Jack Phillips, actually no, let's save that for the end. Um,
Mhm.
but I'll put on a timer for 5 minutes. And if you want to just start, let me know when you want to go.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that the free speech debate, it's really important. I think it's influenced a lot of people's voting patterns as well. Um, and what we particularly seen is issues with free speech from both Biden and Trump administration. I'm seeing it more lately with this Trump administration, which is um, kind of concerning. It's not something that I expected
Hmm.
from this administration. Um, I think in general, it seems that even let's going back like 50, 60 years, I believe it was UC Berkeley that was the birthplace of free speech, campus free speech. And I remember when I was specifically in college, there was we had some radical speakers coming on a campus, and there was always met with protests and people saying, hey, "Why is this person invited? Who invited them? I can't believe we're funding this." Um, but time and time again, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of free speech, especially on college campuses, on public spaces. Um, and I think it's one of the hallmarks of our American society. I think it's something that um, it's a right that we usually take for granted. Um, and a lot of countries uh, don't have this privilege that we have. It's very fundamental to um, our society, and it's kind of concerning that we're seeing a attack on free speech rights with this with the Trump administration, especially with the crackdown on campus protests, and it's something that it mirrors back onto what we've seen, at least what I've seen in my college years. So, just contrasting those two scenarios is pretty interesting to see.
Hmm.
Um, but all in all, I would say that it's just a fundamental right that we as Americans have. And it's just really important for both parties to acknowledge that. And even our liberal justices and conservative justices have both agreed, that free speech is the bedrock of American society. Our founding fathers have, debated um, in public about this. So, and I think they envisioned that um, they want to see, free speech dialogue in public places, and I think that helps foster dialogue between differing opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you still have 2 minutes left. Were you in your original argument comparing that to the Biden administration?
I, not specifically within the Biden administration. It's nothing like that they've particularly done, but
Okay.
um, it's just more what I've seen on college campuses with um, protests, even with like social media censorship.
Hmm.
I've seen that as well. Um, and even I saw like Mark Zuckerberg, he mentioned that the Biden administration came up to him saying that they should restrict the news about the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Wasn't that
Um,
sorry, just to interject real quick, I'm pausing the timer. The Mark Zuckerberg, he said that on Joe Rogan, right?
yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Continue.
he basically said that the Biden administration came up to him, um, saying like, hey, we should restrict any sort of articles that come out of this about the laptop story, and it was just like an angry discourse between Biden administration officials and with Facebook executives. So I think there's a lot of issues
Hmm.
that not only Zuckerberg but other like social media tech companies like that they've also mentioned. Um, it's a it's a tough issue, especially to address as like a social media executive.
Hmm.
Um, you
30
know,
seconds, by the way.
yeah, there's not like a right answer, especially as like a head of a social media company. But I think um, your right to free speech ultimately has to be enshrined in social media discourse, and I think it's just really important to foster that dialogue.
Sweet. Yeah, that pretty much brought you right down to the last 7 seconds. So you're advocating for free speech in general, essentially, and I definitely want to compare the Biden and Trump administration. And I put on a 5 minute timer, but I don't think I'm going to use up all my 5 minutes. Um, so completely agree with free speech in that it is necessary, especially when it comes to opposing. Um, even not even opposing corrupt administrations, but not even just actually corrupt administrations, but even perceived corrupt administrations. Like people should be heard, opinions should be heard, even if it's not a common position. There is um, importance in being the devil's advocate, and I think that's a very scientific, um, you know. An honorable thing where you need to consider all positions. You need to step into the shoes of everyone else in order to get to the best decision possible. um it also comes down to freedom of expression. If people say they want to be gay, they should be allowed to be gay, or trans, or any part of the LGBTQ community. If a group feels like they're oppressed, they should be able to speak up. And I like that you mentioned college campuses, because that's a place where people come together, people learn about things, people advocate for things, people make clubs for things. Um, and we definitely see that a lot right now. My position, I would argue, is that, um, you know, even though there were investigations into Biden's so-called free speech oppression during his administration, I don't think there was any overreach of the government. Um, I think from what I found, there was arguably one case of overreach, uh, or some people say weaponization of the government against free speech during the Biden administration. And I would say there are plenty examples of Donald Trump weaponizing his government against free speech. So my position is that Donald Trump is not would be, but is way worse when it comes to free speech. Specifically, we can talk about the schools. Columbia is one example where a lot of protesters were protesting the war in Gaza.
Hmm.
Same with Harvard right now. That's a big point of contention. And I think there's a fine line between when government should actually I don't think it's a fine line at all. Um, Maybe they should step in if things are getting out of hand. But at the end of the day, no matter what they say, there is free speech. I think, where some people advocate for Hamas, that's stupid. They should be allowed to do that. However, I don't agree that universities should tolerate that. Um, and universities should absolutely, absolutely not tolerate terrorism. During my undergrad, there was a big controversy because people were spray painting swastikas on one of the buildings, and that was a big no-no. And our university squashed that right away. So I think where we could say, okay, maybe things are getting out of hand on these campuses, and the universities themselves need to step up to work on that. I think Trump has gone way too far and is using a lot of buzzwords, there definitely are some very rare cases of people actually advocating for Hamas, but Trump and his administration used that as a buzzword, saying that everyone who's pro-Palestine is actually pro-Hamas, which is so incredibly silly. Right now, they're saying that Harvard is anti-Semitic and promoting anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is politically motivated. Um, and they're taking all these huge steps, like uh, de deporting or attempting to deport Rumeysa Ozturk, who wrote an op-ed. Um,
Hmm.
so that is, I would say, a government overreach, a weaponization, taking away funds from Harvard, and even just promoting um, against Harvard. I'm in my last 10 seconds here, so I think Trump is way more damaging when it comes to free speech. Uh, okay, so that was my thing. I
Yeah.
sorry that was longer
Yeah.
than I thought, but yeah.
Yeah, and I want to push back on what you said about the Biden administration. I think what they mainly did was they pressured social media companies to censor or restrict certain information. I think a lot of that came right during the pandemic,
Hmm.
specifically with vaccines and with masking. Um, there's been a lot of reporting that White House officials within the Biden administration um, pressured Facebook and YouTube to restrict vaccine misinformation, to ban like RFK views. Even
Hmm.
during the height of the pandemic, RFK was really popular on social media, and he was, you know, he had that perspective on vaccine hesitancy. Um, so I would say COVID-19 was a huge factor in just that restriction of free speech, particularly within Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and even there was a court case. I believe it was taken from Missouri. Yeah, it's called Missouri v. Biden. So it was I believe it was brought up by the Attorney General of Missouri, and it alleged that the Biden administration coerced social media companies to censor protected speech.
Hmm.
So about COVID, um, a lot of it was due to the election, the 2020 election, with the allegations of fraud. Um, and ultimately, I believe the court said that the administration may have violated the First Amendment, um, just in restricting that speech. Um, and even looking back at the administration, I've seen a lot of dialogue that was specifically restricted, and it seemed that, and I really don't like to mention it, but Biden's mental condition was arguably it was deteriorating at that time as well, and we saw instances where he was tripping or falling. Um, and this is before that we didn't really know about his prostate cancer diagnosis, and we wish the best for him. But I would say that it's important to highlight, you know, that the administration was taking efforts to restrict that. They were trying to combat that with what Trump would have said. And all in all, I think there was just a murky area that the administration didn't really want to look into. So um, these are just issues that I've noticed that may have restricted free speech and just the open dialogue. And I think it contrasts what the Trump administration is doing. I would say this current administration is a lot more open about, um, restricting free speech or their viewpoints. With the Biden
So sorry,
administration,
you said this administration, the Trump administration, is more open.
they're more open, the more forthcoming about their policies. Um,
When you
and
say more open, just to be clear, do you mean like they're more transparent, like they're telling us what they're doing?
in a way, yes. I mean, they're not like advocating it for in general, but I would say there's more transparency because we do see like the Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, or like the DHS Secretary Christian Nolan, like they will post like full on like excerpts or like the letters that they send to Harvard or a governing
Yeah,
agency.
yeah,
So there's definitely more transparency within that front. So the general public has more of a chance to scrutinize or even critique that.
yeah.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration was just more secretive. Um, they really wanted to keep this a lot of the stuff under the wraps, and like right during the 2020 election, a big thing was the Hunter Biden laptop story. Um, and Mark Zuckerberg specifically said that, um, that was something that Facebook executives mentioned as well, that, you know, the administration was saying, like, hey, we should restrict this, remove any sort of information about this. I think there was a New York Post article regarding that, and I think
Mhm.
um, that spread like wildfire when it first came out. But it was almost instantly restricted within Twitter at the
It-
request of the administration and the campaign.
Sorry, what was immediately restricted?
I believe it was a New York Post article on the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. So I would say the Biden administration was a lot more secretive in restricting free speech in general.
Y- Okay. Um, yeah, so I'm definitely going to push back on that. And I want to focus on the COVID stuff, I guess, first, and then
Yeah.
maybe after we can talk about the Hunter Biden
Sure.
stuff. Um, First off, the Mark Zuckerberg thing. He mentioned he gave all of that information on Joe Rogan's podcast. Um, but what bothers me is that there was an entire case against the Biden administration for this, in which he was testifying, and he never presented that information then. So to me, it seems pretty clearly politically motivated. Because if that was the biggest issue, why the hell would he not bring that to court? Um,
Was this in front of Congress?
yes, yeah. So he testified, yeah, in front of Congress, along with other CEOs,
Oh, yeah,
like
with
Twitter CEOs,
Sundar.
for
Yeah,
example.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, my
Jack,
next,
it was Jack Dorsey at the time, right?
yeah,
It was
yeah,
before Elon. Yeah,
yeah. My next pushback is the Missouri versus Biden case that actually went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reversed the lower court's decision.
yeah. They basically said that the state doesn't have standing.
Right.
If I'm correct, yeah,
Right. Um, my next pushback is where I think it's absolutely reasonable to say that the Biden administration pressured these media companies. But I think there's a big difference between pressure and force, where yes, the Biden administration put pressure on these media companies. I would say that is still within their legal capabilities. Um, and scope, whereas the Trump administration is extending far beyond that, forcing people and universities to make decisions by suing these administration or by suing these universities, by deporting people. they are forcefully doing things that creates fear, and it forces people to do things whether they want them or not. Whereas even though the Biden administration pressured these medias, they didn't have to do anything. Um, I would also rebut with another thing, the difference between dangerous speech and non-dangerous speech. Like I said, I think all speech is important, but like I mentioned earlier, I think like universities should and other private companies or entities or whatever should push back and punish people uh, who give dangerous speech. Like we should not allow anti-Semitism. And in the case of the Biden administration pressuring medias, they didn't want to allow COVID, specifically COVID vaccine misinformation, which is incredibly dangerous. We shouldn't let idiots, complete idiots like RFK Jr. come out and be like, "Oh, this thing's freaking horrible," when it goes through many processes, and was tested for its safety and all of that. And less people would take the vaccine and more people would die. So I think the Biden administration had a moral obligation to step in there. And yes, I think they definitely did pressure things, but I think it was within their legal means. Whereas the Trump administration is kind of making stuff up and saying like Harvard's anti-Semitic and this person's pro-Hamas. Like I forget the guy at Columbia, I forget his name, who they're saying he's pro-Hamas, yet there's no evidence
Oh,
that he's
Mahmoud.
pro. Yeah, Mahmoud Khalil. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
saying he's pro-Hamas, but there's no evidence for that. So not only are they being forceful with their actions, but it doesn't seem like it's for good reason. If anything, they should take the Biden administration's approach and maybe pressure these universities to say, hey, crack down on this stuff. Please. It's for the best. Um, and my last thing is that I think transparency is a complete straw man. I don't think that's relevant whatsoever, whether they're transparent or not. I'm not going to say a crime or a horrible thing is better just because they're telling us that it's happening. Whether a murder is happening in front of my eyes or behind closed curtains doesn't make it any better or worse.
Yeah, I would push back on that. So you mentioned that I think you would agree that, at that time, the Biden administration was, pressuring social media companies to
Mhm.
restrict content on COVID-19, the vaccine.
Yeah, and also, sorry, I do just want to add on, like, yes, there was pressure, but I don't want to leave it at that. There is a lot of communication. Like there is an effort by the Biden administration they wanted to create um like a team or a movement within these media companies to promote real and backed scientific information rather than fraudulent and dangerous information.
So I would say that vaccine information or misinformation, as crazy as it may be, it's protected by the First Amendment. I think
True.
it's very dangerous to say, what is dangerous speech or not. Supreme Court has like ruled on this many times. Even
Yeah,
like hate speech is protected by the First Amendment.
that's
It,
true.
I'll just say this, that it's ultimately the role of social media companies, and I really value what X is doing or Twitter is
Yeah.
doing with community notes. And I've seen that, especially if there's a crazy post on like vaccines, there's a significant, like a profound community note that will
Hmm.
link like a scientific article. So I
Right.
think that's really important. And ultimately, I feel like it needs to go back to the social media companies to, push back on crazy, conspiracy, or if it comes from RFK or anyone that you maybe think of.
Yeah. I think the issue with like, oh, let's just do community notes. Like people are still seeing all the bullshit out there, and people don't care to look at the community notes. Like people don't care to look for the facts or the truth or whatever it might be. But also like there's definitely a moral obligation for companies like Twitter and Facebook to punish people for dangerous speech. Like a clear example is like, why the hell is Elon allowing Kanye to spread Nazi propaganda and advertise for his merchandise, which has a swastika on that? Like, okay, yeah, free speech. We're not going to jail you for it, but what the fuck? There should be some consequences. And it's a private company. They have the ability to limit that shit.
Yeah,
And
I
we
would
know
agree
that
with
they have the
that.
ability to
Yeah.
limit that shit because we see people on Twitter who make fun of Elon and then oops, they're banned suddenly. So it just seems so incredibly dangerous and damaging. Like even if we have community notes, people will see it and not think twice. And people, there are bots and stuff, and it's very dangerous.
But in a way, I do respect what Community Notes is doing, and I think Facebook is trying to adopt a similar policy.
Yeah, but people just
So
don't care. They don't care about community notes.
uh,
You know,
I don't know if they.
look at like you could go to Marjorie Taylor Greene and like every single thing that she says gets community noted, and then there are people in the comments who are still in love with her. Like,
Yeah, ultimately, I think you have to like sign up for the community note program. So
yeah,
you have to like sign up for that, and then like you can then only can you like
yeah.
add
But
like
also like
links or
we can't censor we can't community note videos and stuff that we see on other like if it just doesn't have community notes like Facebook or YouTube or whatever, then you can't even do that. You know?
even with deep fakes, it's a huge issue. I
Yeah,
mean,
that
when you
too.
have
That too. So all I'm saying
something,
is like I think the Biden administration did the right thing. They want to regulate dangerous stuff essentially for the better of the country. I think there's a reasonable argument to say okay maybe they did it the wrong way. But I think
but ultimately, I don't think
99.99% of the time they're in their scope, their legal
I,
scope.
I don't think it needs to come from the government. It just seems politically motivated. If they really wanted to, restrict that speech,
Yeah.
I
I
I
mean
understand. I
I would
understand about the election, and especially with January 6th. I understand, but like the amount of information
mhm,
that you would have to, personally like, pinpoint. It's like, hey, is this hate speech or is this dangerous speech? It will take forever. So
I don't think so. I think there's
yeah,
pretty blatant hate speech like everywhere on Twitter.
no, back in like 2020, I'm
Yeah,
talking about like the election fraud and things of that. So
yeah.
in my opinion, I think that
I mean, I
um,
guess, yeah. My immediate pushback is like, yeah, I guess we could argue it's politically motivated, but it it hurt them politically. Like, I think that damaged them. So I don't think we can say it's politically motivated. You
yeah,
know?
to a case to a certain extent, yeah. And even with Elon,
Yeah,
I feel like Twitter is just every day it's getting much worse.
yeah,
You can just see it by the posts.
yeah,
Um, it's pretty blatant too. So it's a lot different from other sites like Facebook or Instagram or there's just like a distinct difference that we see on X.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, like you mentioned about Kanye, I think that's crazy.
Yeah, like what the fuck are we doing?
And yeah, I mean, he even released that album. I don't even know if that was platformed on um, Spotify or Apple Music. But
Yeah. People found ways to get it.
yeah,
But yeah, no, I think even though free speech is great and all, and people shouldn't get um jailed for it, there definitely should be consequences for this stuff. And I think there's a moral obligation specifically for dangerous speech, and I don't think Biden administration was doing anything crazy. And we can make the argument as well that like, oh, they weren't super transparent about it, but they weren't trying to hide it, you know. Um, it, it, they weren't trying to
but
promote it, but like
don't you agree that the pushback needs to come back from the public? Like, I feel like the American public needs to
but
speak out against like hate speech that we see as wrong. I
that's
mean,
true. I think the public should be the main arbiters of that. But
yeah,
when dangerous speech is winning, or if there's speech that is so incredibly dangerous, then that needs to be nipped in the bud, you know?
so, what would you say is case where like dangerous speech like overpowered or like
Like there's a huge anti-vax movement right now. Like RFK is anti-vax. Trump was like suspicious about the vaccines or whatever. And like whether they're right or wrong, they're in powerful positions that are going to influence people. And people are it causes more death. Like
yeah,
that
but
is a
I
moral
would say
reason, you know?
the majority of the American people, I don't think that they are anti-vax, or they might have like
Yeah,
some
yeah, but it's not going to
skepticism
help.
about the vaccine.
That's true, but it's not, and you should have skepticism of the vaccine. Everyone should. But it doesn't help with any increase increased percent of the population being anti-vax. Vaccines are like it's just so silly that we would that people would promote that at all, you know? And I think the Biden administration sees that and it's like, okay, we can't let this get out of hand because this is silly. Like this is gonna cause death for no reason whatsoever, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think there was just like a heightened like awareness like right during the
Yeah.
pandemic, and that's something I applaud the Biden administration for doing.
Hmm.
Um, there was a lot of rural counties that just did not want to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Um, I still remember
Dude,
seeing that map.
every time like I if someone mentions a county like that, I just think of like Oklahoma. Like that's just like the go-to most conservative.
Yeah, like one of my friends, he did like a road trip right during like 2021,
Mhm.
and he went to I think it was Glacier National Park in Montana, and he was saying like there in Montana, like people act like the pandemic never existed. Like no one's wearing a mask. No one like actually
Yeah.
cares. Like
Yeah.
so, in a way, I feel like there's a media gap. It could be like
Hmm.
Fox News or like CNN, but
Yep.
like that information from the federal government just did not reach like people in Montana or Oklahoma,
Right.
in these rural counties. That's just a fact.
Yep.
And you can blame it on Fox News or anything like that, but ultimately, it just that information just did not come.
Yeah.
Um, so there
Yeah.
needs to be more, in my opinion. There needs to be more of a cohesive, comprehensive like method to advocate for you know like vaccine safety. I think um, what Dr. Fauci or having medical professionals from the CDC, FDA, NIH, they can come out, and actually address like these rural counties, that may not know like much about what the vaccine,
Hmm.
and they might like look at it like vaccine skepticism, and
Yeah.
so I think it's important to advocate and provide insight on that.
Yeah. So you're saying like, okay, we should advocate more for the good things rather than restrict the bad things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think my pushback on that is like it was the Trump administration that was in power when the vaccine was created, and he hated Fauci, and he did like everything in his power, using his words, uh, to say how much Fauci sucks, and like, oh, this is all Fauci's fault. Like, what the fuck, you know? Like they sucked at advocating for the vaccine, and it was mostly because of Trump. Like,
Well, ultimately, he did say that the American public needs to get vaccinated, right?
yeah,
Because
like once after he caved.
but it was his Operation Warp Speed that that set like
he
these
he
vaccine.
initially he initially opposed Operation Warp Speed. He then took credit for it afterwards.
What the Operation Warp Speed?
Yeah, yeah. He's like, well, initially he was very skeptical about Fauci and his whole process and everything, and like, oh, we don't need a vaccine because it's just another flu. Everyone should just get it and then we'll be better.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I remember 15 days to
yeah,
the
and then
flu.
after everything is said and done, when people talk about how great the vaccine was and how quick it was, he was like, yeah, I did that. That was all me. So he's a complete media propagandist. Like that's all he does.
And once again, this is right before the election, so you
Y-
know you
Yep.
you want a um, good political standing, and I think he mentioned this during the 2020 debates. You know, hey, we brought these vaccine manufacturers in. Where if you get vaccinated, this stuff will go away. So once again, yeah, this is right before the election,
Mhm.
and um, ultimately, the American people voted, and I think they felt like the Biden administration had the better COVID response or COVID proposal at that time.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And I don't think just based on the time, because I know you have to go in like 13 minutes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to get to the other ones, but we can save that for the future. Um, just additionally adding on to this to the same conversation. Oh, where's the stuff I was looking at? Yeah, I just think when it comes to free speech, all for it, 1,000%. I think it's worse under Trump. I think even given the pressure on media companies by Biden, um, Trump does not care about free speech at all. Going back to, he just cares what looks good in the media, and he, attributes bad things to other people and good things to him. And I could give a lot of examples right now of clear cut, um, forceful oppression of free speech. And it just seems like we're watching like this entire presidency right now, Trump's presidency is revenge porn in 4K, even if it means forcefully denying free speech from people.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, and like I mentioned, the Trump administration has a different outlook on restricting free speech than
Yeah.
what the Biden administration did. Um, uh,
Would you say that the Trump administration is forcefully, um, rather than pressuring, would you say that the Trump administration is forcefully taking away free speech from some people? And I can give some examples if you'd like.
I think specifically in the case of Harvard, yes, because just with the actions that they've done with international students and just restricting
Hmm.
federal grants in general,
Hmm.
like to be honest, it makes no sense. Like there's a lot of graduate students, there's a lot of researchers that there's a lot that just go into Harvard, and that's just being taken away for what? Like they have nothing to do with this. Same thing with like international students. Like most of them have
Oh my gosh, yeah,
like have
banning visas.
yeah.
Is that what you're gonna say?
Yes, yeah. Um, and I think federal court actually ruled in favor of Harvard recently. I think it was a few days ago actually. Um,
Yeah,
so,
I forget what it's for.
but yeah, because ultimately Harvard sued the
Oh,
Trump
I think it was for
administration.
the either the tax ex exemption or some other funding. But anyways,
Yeah, I think it's no, I think it's international students.
well, they already ruled on that. I thought that was just like it came out yesterday or today even.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I need to look at that. But
Oh, no, you're right. You're right. There was an injunction. I think essentially there was a pause until it goes to the court or whatever.
so it would have to go up to the Supreme Court ultimately, right?
Or some lower appeals court than the Supreme Court.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I should look this up. I was like, huh, would the Supreme Court actually rule on this?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, I think yeah, in that case specifically, like I guess we just have to wait to see what happens.
I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's a slippery slope, especially if like the
Oh
conservative
yeah.
justices.
Yeah. I think it's a
Ironic
slippery
enough,
slope with like the due process stuff too.
the Chief Justice John Roberts, he went to Harvard, so
Oh, really?
yeah. I'm curious on how he will vote on that. Um,
Yeah, if it gets
so
up there, yeah.
yeah, but yeah, yeah, it's definitely more profound what the Trump administration is doing. Um, and I did want to go back
Mhm,
to Operation Warp Speed.
mhm,
So you did mention that um, you know Trump had concerns with Operation Warp Speed, but I I looked this up, and yeah, it was launched in May 2020. The goal was to deliver 300 million vaccine doses. Um, so I remember he was touting it a lot. He had Dr. Fauci by his side. Um,
mhm,
and this was a public private partnership between the HHS and DoD, and then I believe it was Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, the top vaccine manufacturers at that time. So um, there was a great push from the White House right before the election. Um, and even at that time, there's a lot of conservative pundits that were completely opposed to this for even for religious reasons, for um,
mhm,
personal reasons that I'm not taking this vaccine. We're just rushing this right before the election. Um, so there was a lot of skepticism from that, but I don't think it's
mhm,
fair to say that Trump at that specific time, like right before the election, I don't think it's fair to say that he was like anti-vax or like opposed to that. In my opinion, I would say that he was trying to push a vaccine as fast as he could
mhm,
right before the election. At least he could have a leverage against Joe Biden and say like, "Hey, I got this vaccine rollout," and then um, if you take this vaccine, the U.S. economy is going to stabilize. We're going to be better
mhm.
off. And I think that was his ultimate goal.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One thing I will say, or I guess a couple things. I don't think the timing of it itself was politically motivated. I mean, it just happened to hit at the end of his administration. But I would definitely argue that the messaging was politically motivated, and maybe it's a misrepresentation of me to have said that he's anti-vax or that he was totally against Operation Warp Speed. But he said stuff like opposing mandates, and didn't want to issue what is it, stay-at-home orders, stuff like that. Um, so I think clarifying my claim earlier is that he definitely didn't help advocate for it. It was a lot of Fauci and WHO and the HHS trying to promote that information, but it almost always seemed like Trump was opposing it in some way, to some degree.
I
Um,
disagree with that. No, it's okay. We can
Yeah, I
agree
guess I
to
shouldn't say
disagree.
I shouldn't say he was opposing it, but he definitely wasn't helping it. So yeah, I think there's probably a misrepresentation to say opposing, but he definitely wasn't like helping it a lot.
Yeah. In my opinion, also, I don't think the administration had a solid plan to address like the COVID response in the coming years. Like it was more so like, hey, we just got to push this vaccine right before November of 2020, uh, and
Hmm.
that was their ultimate goal. Politically, that
Yeah,
sounds great, but like for the economy, for people's livelihoods, it's terrible. And and
yeah, and I think that's probably why he was not like a super advocate for it because he knows like a lot of people in his base are like listening to RFK and they're like really skeptical about the vaccine.
I think even before RFK, I think a
Yeah,
lot of it was religious reasons. I would say that is
yeah,
probably one of the biggest ones.
hmm,
A lot of rural counties are, heavily like Southern Baptist, and I know people that have, not taken the vaccine. They've opted for religious exemptions. Um,
yeah,
they've actually written to the employer, put it on some like Bible verses and say like, "Hey, I want a religious exemption from the COVID vaccine." Um,
yeah. Yeah,
and
and I think throughout the entire time, people were offered exemptions because of religious reasons, correct?
yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And there's a Supreme Court case that went up. It was OSHA versus, I think it was OSHA versus Biden. But basically, the OSHA requirement was that, you know, every federal employee needs to be vaccinated against COVID-19.
Hmm.
Um, I think it was at least one dose, and that ultimately got
Yeah.
struck down by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I believe, I think it was Elena Kagan, one of the liberal justices. She actually voted in favor with these conservative justices. So, um, and basically they said like OSHA doesn't have the standing to rule on every federal employee that you must be, vaccinated
Hmm.
against COVID. Um,
Hmm.
I won't say if I like disagree or agree with that. I ultimately, the Supreme Court already ruled on that, but
Yeah.
it, there's a lot of underlying issues. If people have pre-existing health conditions, um,
Hmm.
people have religious exemptions as well.
Yeah. There's
Ultimately, that
definitely.
needs to be a discussion between you and your employer.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, because it's not a black and white, like, should we have a mandate or not? There are gray areas, like you said. There are reasons for exemption. I think the most common reason would be a religious reason. So there, and I would say, like, mandates are not new, and there absolutely should be a mandate for or should have been a mandate for COVID if there weren't any in any cases, because they're not new. Companies mandate vaccines and stuff, and like it's a common thing and should have been and was a thing during COVID to help save lives. But like I said, there are definitely reasons for exemption. Um,
and even with the masking, I think that was only lifted like in 2022.
yeah,
Um,
it was on and off towards the end. Yeah,
yeah, so Biden administration ruled that masking needs to be mandated on all.
1,000%. I think that one's different than vaccines. That should have a no exception for mandating masking.
And I think that would have been a different outlook with the Trump administration. And
Yeah.
once again, it's like a fundamental like comparison um, between those two administrations. Like the Trump administration really did not have a solid plan to look
No,
at.
no,
Um,
and like I said, I think that's because he knows, like, his base of
yeah,
people.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just so hard to convince people who in rural counties that they might not have like the access to these media sources or hearing directly from the
Hmm.
nation's top infectious disease doctor
Yeah.
or from
Yeah.
HHS or CDC, NIH.
Yeah.
There's just that um, lack of communication
Hmm. Well,
or lack of thereof of communication from the federal government.
I totally see. I agree with that, and I would honestly jump in the fact that Fauci, um, they didn't have great messaging. And I think that's why there was a lot of pushback against Fauci. Their messaging could have been better. Um, but anyways, just because I know we're low on time, um, uh, just a little background on yourself here, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, like, I think there's a lot of media manipulation, bias, even when it comes to the words Republican, Democrat, stuff like that. You yourself, obviously we had a great conversation, and there's still more to talk about the other two topics that we have.
Mhm.
um but everything I hear from you and your brother, it makes me think that you guys would actually really like all of the uh, policies that come from people like Joe Biden or Barack Obama and stuff like that. Um, so I don't know. I'm just curious as to, like, okay, what is the reason why you support Donald Trump over other candidates?
No, I wouldn't say that I support Donald Trump or any specific candidate. Um, no, I value a candidate based on their policies. You know, Republican, Democrat. There's a lot on the Democrat side that I
Hmm.
find really appealing. For example, um, Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky. I think he's doing a great job. Kentucky has um, experienced a lot of like natural disasters, tornadoes, a lot of destruction,
Hmm.
and the Governor Beshear has done a really good job on that. Um, even with the COVID response as well. Um, and even looking at like the governor of North Carolina, Josh Stein, he was recently elected. He won by like 14%, which is crazy uh,
Hmm.
in a southern state. So um, he's done a really good job in rebuilding the Western North Carolina after
Hmm.
Hurricane Helene. So it's just these um, different politicians. They have different outlooks on just
Yep.
addressing the voters and the people in their state. And there's a lot of candidates, at least I've been seeing on the 2028 side, or like who the media speculates on
Hmm.
them running. So
Yeah.
um, definitely more promising candidates, in my opinion.
Okay. So I think that's an honorable thing to focus on like specific people, and like the things that they're doing in their positions. I think that's great, and that's exactly what you should do. But just generally speaking, the stuff that we've talked about, um, it just it just makes me think like, I mean, just going back to what I said, like even if you like Andy Bashir,
Mhm.
like, it seems like you like a lot of the Democratic policies better. I mean, just from what we've talked about today on the stuff that we talked about, it seems like, you know,
Well,
I don't know, just trying to
it's
get a
not.
sense of things. I don't want to like ascribe anything to you, but
Well, these are just like two issues. There's a variety of different
yeah,
issues
yeah, absolutely.
um, that like will ultimately factor into a vote. And even with like Andy Bashir,
Hmm.
he's handling a state that voted for Donald Trump by 30%. So like how do you manage that? That in and of itself is extraordinary. I'm pretty sure he's against an assault
Hmm.
weapons ban. Um, I think he has more of like a centrist view on abortion. He's not like um, completely like pro-choice or pro-life. I think he's
Okay,
more um, on like a centrist side. Ultimately, I don't think he could win if he doesn't have those um, two policy views on gun
sure.
control and abortion. So,
So does
um,
that make you liking that one person who happens to be Republican? That makes you like Republican candidates better?
well, it depends. It really depends on who that
Yeah.
candidate is. Like for example, Governor Kelly Ayotte. I actually met her twice, I believe. So she's great,
Hmm.
and I think she provides a moderate look. She's not a Trumper. she's
Yeah.
I don't even think she voted for Trump, but she won New Hampshire by like 8%,
Okay.
while Kamala Harris won New Hampshire by like 3 or 4%. So
Yeah.
there was a good chunk of New Hampshire residents that voted for Kelly Ayotte, a Republican, and then Kamala Harris as a Democrat. So people, and she has a really good approval rating right now, and I think people understand that there needs to be more of a nuanced take, and just um, working on both sides of the aisle. And I
Yeah.
think someone like
Well,
Kelly is
I love talking
doing
about
that.
this, but the stuff you say, like, oh, this person's, conservative or Republican, but not MAGA. Well, that makes me think that you would support, you know, at least currently right now, the other side more than Trump.
But in like what candidate? Or are you talking about like
Well,
midterm election or?
I guess what I'm trying to say is like if you support those people who you describe as having like some centrist positions or and are also not MAGA, then I would have suspected that you voted for like Kamala, for example. Um, You know what I'm saying? Like it's just like even non-MAGA Republicans are closer to the left side than they are to MAGA. Like MAGA is extremely radical.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think most Republicans they would I agree with the same sentiment as well.
Okay.
Um, so you're asking if like for example, I get like sometimes I get like polls that like there's a pollster that will call,
Right.
and then it's usually from like a university and be like, hey, how do you feel about the Biden administration? How do you feel about the Trump administration?
Right.
Um, and they'll just sometimes it's like an online survey, and then it's usually just like on a scale of like 1 to 5. How do you feel about the administration?
Hmm.
Um, so I think it's somewhat flawed, but in
Hmm.
general, like those surveys have it'll point you to a direction on like Trump's approval rating or like the administration and
Yeah.
like if they're doing well on something, if they're not doing well on something.
Hmm.
So in those cases, I would approach that in a more like a centrist view. I don't think there's like a definite answer for that.
Okay. All right. Nope, that's completely fair. And I like where your mind is at. Like I said, it seems like you're focusing on the person and their policies individually rather than party, which is awesome because I think that it gets rid of any bias. Um, but
But
I
I'll also ask you,
yeah.
is there a Republican candidate that you find admirable, or at least in like the 2028 like speculation? Is there someone in particular that it's like,
Yeah,
hey, I
I
would
I
vote, I could vote for that person?
um I can't think of any Republicans specifically, at least in Congress and in the administration currently because they're so extreme. Um, But I will say I like a lot of, or I maybe not a lot, but some of the Republican ideas. Like I like the idea of Doge. I don't think it was executed well. I don't think
Well,
Elon was the right guy for it.
he's leaving the government, so
Yeah, I know. Like he's in and out. It's like they didn't save like anything. Elon just got a bunch of government contracts and got rid of all of the investigations against him, and then he's gone. It's like, okay, good idea, but that was horrible execution. I'll also point towards RFK, who is like, like a huge skeptic of like anything science, which people should be skeptical. And he focuses a lot on like the nutrition of things and how like the nutrition in our country sucks, which it absolutely does. But does he know what he's doing? Not at all. So I would say those are a couple examples of some of the ideas that I like, but I don't think there are a ton of people or I guess current Republicans in the administration, in the Congress who represent those and execute them well. And honestly, I will add, I think a lot of people are way closer in terms of policy and what they actually want than they think. But the thing that divides us is this kind of tribalism through like, oh,
mm,
I was born a Republican, so I have to be a Republican, or if I was born Democratic, I have to be Democratic. And there's just a lot of playing games, playing politics, media manipulation. Um, so I think that's unfortunately a stronger force than other things right now. But honestly, I think we're all pretty close.
oh yeah, I think most Republicans are willing to listen to the Democrat side.
Mhm.
And there's a lot more in common
Yeah,
than people think.
yeah,
And it's just like these um, sit down conversations or debates in general,
yeah,
just to like hash out different
yeah.
viewpoints.
And yeah, Joel, I'm super happy that you jumped on here because this is honest to God the best way to you know to parse things out, to distinguish like what we actually want and how all of us actually feel about things because media is very short-sighted. So these conversations are super super important. So yeah, I just thank you so much for willing to be here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Sean. Yeah,
Yeah.
had a great
Um,
time.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're still watching at the end, thank you so much for joining. Like, comment, subscribe. Maybe we'll see Joel in the future. If you listen to one of the previous podcasts with Johan, who Joel referred to at the beginning, they're actually twin brothers. So if you think they sound the same, that's the reason why. So thank you for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.